Okay, let's move forward with our clinical speaker today, Dr. Paresh Patel. He's a graduate of UNC School of Dentistry, and he's very much an implant guy, right? He completed the AAID Maxi course. He's a diplomat of the ICOI. He's placed more than 5,000 implants and published in leading journals and lectured about dental implants and prosthetics throughout the U.S. He's got a private practice in Lenoir and in Mooresville, North Carolina. But his topic today is dental photography, and I can tell you that he is eminently qualified to teach this topic. He has created some of the most innovative and striking photographs that I have ever seen in the world of dentistry. And as he always does, he'll make the topic simple and practical. It's a topic that even an attorney will love.
Today's topic is going to be fun. I know lots of heavy things weighing on our minds, going back to work, it's sort of anxiety, but this is something, just like Dr. Park is alluding to, that we can put into practice right now. We don't have to be at the office to do some of these things because everyone's a photographer. Everyone has a smartphone. And I'll show you that some of these photographs, we don't need to run out and buy expensive equipment. We can put this into our personal use, our family life, our professional life, our office, in whatever degree you want to. So I'm hoping that this will be a fun topic, a light topic, and we'll move on going into the seminar and trying to get that done. So let's have some fun with this. And this is one of those little photos that I created. And if you come to the full workshop, that when we're actually having lectures and workshops that you guys can attend, I'll show you how to blend photos like this together. One of the best ways to have fun in your practice, have fun with your staff, have fun with your patients, is to make creative photos like this. And, you don't have to follow what I do. Certainly whatever is fascinating to you, I think you can blend together. And this is something that you'll learn in the true workshop, how to blend two photos together so they look seamless. It looks like I'm actually coming out of the camera right there. So let's jump into this. Everyone has a camera. And if you don't, I'm sure that you have a smartphone. If you have a smartphone, you are a photographer. And if I look at your camera roll, usually I can tell exactly what excites you and what your big passions are, because it's going to be full of your pets or your family, your teeth, work, whatever it is, your sports, your hobbies. So don't listen to this webinar and only think that this is for someone who has a big, expensive camera setup. All the principles you can certainly understand. Hopefully I'll distill it down. We're trying to make an 8-hour workshop into about 45 minutes. Hopefully you'll get some pearls out of this. But if you have the smartphone, you have a camera. Now, can you achieve results like this with your smartphone? Well, you can get close. So I don't want you to think that, oh, I've got a camera in my smartphone, I can do this right here. But you can get really, really close. It's that last 10% that I always say separates away the real winners from everybody else. That doesn't mean that you can't start with your smartphone, but if you want to photograph some of your work like this, please consider coming to the workshop. I have nothing to gain except for making the level of documentation, the level of your own personal creativity increase. And I think you'll find that new level of passion as we return back to our offices and accept what the new normal is going to be. So what can photography do for you? Well, certainly it can help diagnostics. Without photography, we run into things where we have to rely on our memory. And just like our panelists have said that, without checklists, without having information that we can go back and review, we don't always make the best decisions. So when we're trying to diagnose and treatment plan without photography, we're going to run into a problem. So let's say you had this patient right here and you sent them to your surgeon and said, please place some implants. And you got back to treatment plan and says, Doc, I'm going to put 4 implants in a all-on-4 fashion. We won't debate whether this is the perfect treatment plan or not. But if that's all you did was to send a patient to the surgeon to have some implants placed, you may get some implants back and say, okay, yeah, I can restore that. But what if you didn't take a photo? Would a photo have been useful here? Would that have been useful for you to communicate with the laboratory, for you to communicate with your surgeon, for you to communicate to the patient? Because certainly this is going to be a failure if we're going to try to do a pink and white prosthesis for this patient. We have implants that are in. We have implants that have now healed. And now we're ready to start our process of making a bridge for this patient. And we have an aha moment that maybe some photography could have helped. And now this picture right here was taken with my iPhone. So, never use the excuse that I don't have that fancy camera that Dr. Patel is talking about. And I'll show you the cameras that I have, and you'll be amazed at what kind of pictures you can get with the right understanding of the camera settings, what you're able to do. What's another thing that photography can help with? Well, certainly photography can help communicate with Glidewell. If we look at the vast majority of scripts that probably come in, it's got written in there, please make crown for whatever tooth number, and may or may not even have a shade. You guys are better than that. So I expect everyone that is listening to this webinar certainly writes more information than this. But we want to make sure that if we have something of aesthetic value, we have something very specific, rather than write a novel of what we're wanting to do, maybe a photograph would communicate that much better to our laboratory technician. If we have something like this, say a single central incisor, one of the most difficult things for us as dentists to fix or restore, and even with the best laboratory help, without a photograph, it's going to be difficult. How do we communicate to the laboratory the texture? How do we communicate to them the different levels of color, the translucency, certainly the shape they can get off the cast, but there's so many things of value that would really communicate to the laboratory technician, what am I looking for in the end to make sure this patient gets the best result possible? If I'm going to charge a patient a premium for this product right here because it's the single anterior tooth, wouldn't it be nice to have my laboratory technician see what I see and be able to give me back what I'm writing on the piece of paper? Because with that kind of information, is this perfect? No, it's not perfect. Is it pretty acceptable? I think so. Is it something that I'm proud to have done for my patient? Well, I really wanted one more craze line in there. But my patient looked at it and said, wow, doc, you really work with a great laboratory. So to get this kind of result, certainly I think demands that we communicate to our laboratory technician with something other than just a laboratory script. What about a third option for photography? And I call this selling the case. And a lot of doctors shy away from thinking with the word selling in it. But we are a business. We deal with patients that have to make decisions just like any other decision they might have to make for their own personal life. So we have to make sure that we put the value of our work in front of our patient. And sometimes the best way to communicate the value of what we're offering our patients is to show them what we can do. Do we have to have an expensive Canon camera like this to communicate that to them? Absolutely not. But a patient that can see what you can do is certainly more likely to pull their disposable dollars out and communicate that and be willing to spend that money in your office. In the world now that we live in, as all our panelists have sort of alluded to, teledentistry, wouldn't it be nice to be able to share examples of work that you've done with your patient? If your patient's showing a Zoom conference or a webcast with you, or a FaceTime meeting with you, and they've shown you a picture of their front teeth and said, doc, I know that you told me that I needed to get this tooth taken care of. It's got a big abscess on it now, big swelling in it. And you're looking at their photo from their iPhone. Wouldn't it be nice to say, gosh, Mr. Smith, I fully understand where you're coming from. That certainly looks like it could be painful. Let's talk about some options, but let me show you what we were able to do with another person that had another front tooth very similar to yours. Is this the kind of dentistry that you're looking for? And that really helps to move that teledentistry conference in the right direction. So let's take a look at an example. In this example, I think everyone in the webinar certainly can agree that if a patient showed up with these two centrals, that we may not even need to ask them, what are you unhappy about with your two front crowns? But all that aside, wouldn't it be great to take a photo like this with this level of quality, with this level of attention to detail? And I'm going to show you how to achieve that kind of result so we can communicate to our laboratory technician, what are we after? Do we like the shape? Do we not like the shape? Do we like the color of the centrals, or do we like the color of the adjacent teeth? Do we want to change the shape? And all of these things can easily be communicated to our laboratory technician if we take the photograph. But it also helps to make our patient understand and appreciate the value that we're creating for them. Because if we show them this next photo where we've now removed the PFMs that are there, and we're showing them the final result right here, if this was the next patient that had the need for some centrals to be restored, we might be able to communicate the value of, boy, I think I can give you the result that we like if we do more than just your two front teeth. What if we talked about some veneers on the adjacent teeth? Now, is every patient going to accept this treatment? Absolutely not. But until the patients can see a complete picture of what you're able to create, then I don't think we can fully say that the patient chose this based off of their education and understanding of what you're able to do. So I always like to have photographs that communicate for me to the patient what's achievable and what's not achievable right there. So photography also, we have had a great opportunity to increase our education over the last, 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. And to put all that into practice, I think if we can embrace photography, we can take all the things that we've learned. If we actually go into the clinic and start doing those things, boy, wouldn't it be nice to start taking pictures of our work so we can then go back and self-reflect and say, was I able to actually achieve those benchmarks that I watched all these webinars on and improved my mental capacity? Now I can critique myself on what I'm actually able to do for my patients right there. So if we look at something as simple as a posterior restoration, if we're used to doing amalgam restorations, and we're certainly all used to doing composite restorations, wouldn't it be nice if we watched a webinar on how to achieve world-class composite restorations, even if they're just occlusals or buccals, like in this example right here? I think even if I was not a dentist and just a lay person, I could certainly value the appreciation to say, boy, the restoration or filling on the bottom dock looks to me like something I'd rather have than what I see on the top. So this right here would certainly build a lot of value, I think, for your patient to be able to see. And then what about marketing? The last thing that photography could certainly do. I mean, we talked about all of these things to communicate, but in this world of Instagram and Facebook and everything else, why not create the content that's just a little bit different? Make that 10% difference for you in your practice to showcase what it is that you really love. And that's what comes easy. If you love doing a certain thing, then you're probably going to take photos of that. And then you can blend that in with whatever it is that you're wanting to do with your own personal, with your own personal things. So here's an example of a case that we did with some veneers. And, I think you could see that this person's smile really speaks for itself. So this was one of our social marketing posts right there. And I think it really shows the closing of that diastema. I mean, it was a rather large diastema to close. And we were able to showcase this as just a social media post because my patient really just radiated with her smile right there. And then the other thing is that, as your confidence builds with the new things that you learn, you certainly can start to go into other things. And I'm not saying that everyone has to now jump into veneers or cosmetic dentistry. But, after I spent a little bit of time trying to, broaden the scope of my practice, this beautiful young lady came in and she has all of these stains that she's been living with and decalcifications for when she was younger from ortho. And she's like, I really want to see what you could do to help me smile again. So we decided that, this was going to be a combination of some crowns and some veneers for her. And I was motivated by really Dr. Chi's sort of presentation for his Bruxer aesthetic veneers. So we started by doing her lower veneers, and then you can see how we artistically did that. So we went from where she started on the lower to our preps veneers, and these happen to be Bruxer aesthetic, so full zirconia veneers that we then bonded into place. So we started with her lower, for example, right there, and then we moved on to her uppers. Beautiful casework here. I mean, I couldn't imagine more translucency. I couldn't imagine better shapes, all of which really came about through communication with the laboratory technician when we're in the diagnostic phase and the wax up to say, these are the shapes that I really want the anteriors to look like. Once that's done, then we can see what we're able to do for our patient to move her from where she started with some very conservative dentistry to give her this kind of result at the end. Could you have taken these pictures with your iPhone? 400% certain. Would they have this exact look to them? Maybe not, but I think you certainly could communicate to your patients what we were able to do for them with this kind of work right there. So, and at the end, this is the photo that she wanted me to take of her. So now I've got a patient who wants to essentially be my model for our social media posts. And the best thing about this is that they want to then share that on their own Instagram story or their own Facebook story. And we always ask them to, do us one huge favor if you can. If you're happy with your smile, you're happy with your teeth, tag, us as your dentist. And of course, you know what the answer is going to be. With a smile like that and the patient radiating, it's very easy for them to come back and say, I wouldn't have anybody else do this except for Dr. Patel. So what do you need to get these kind of photos? And to sort of get right down to the dirty of it, you're going to need a digital SLR camera. Whether you get a Nikon or whether you get a Canon, I have no dog in the fight on that. I just need you to buy a camera that accepts lenses. When I say lenses, the body is the actual part you hold, and the lens is what then communicates that information to the sensor inside the camera. The reason I'm going to suggest Canon or Nikon is those are the ones that have the largest and most plentiful amount of lenses from the manufacturer, and also third-party lenses as well, that they may not be a brand of Canon or a brand of Nikon. The thing to remember is that only a Canon lens will fit a Canon camera, and only a Nikon lens will fit a Nikon camera. So your money is going to be tied up in the lens, the piece of glass that gets that image to your sensor, not necessarily the actual body. So the take-home message is, the body of the camera is kind of like a computer. As you know, every few years, a computer needs to be replaced because the next greater processor is around. So there's going to be an increase in the processor size of the camera. There's going to be more pixels in the sensor. There's going to be a better sensor. There's going to be a larger sensor. So all of these things, I don't want you to run out and go buy the most expensive body out there. I want you to go out there and buy the most reasonably priced body out there. And I want you to save your money for the next step, which is the lens. To achieve this kind of dentistry, we're going to need something called a macro lens. And a macro lens is what we want as intraoral photographers, but it's also funny because that same macro lens is what we want to do to create these sort of stunning portrait photos of our patient, so we can share with our future consults the before and afters that we have. So if you're in the Canon family, you're going to pick a Canon lens, and if you're in the Nikon family, you're going to pick a Nikon macro lens right there. So the take-home message on the lens is that that's where I want you to spend your money, because the source, the camera body or the computer, is always going to get replaced. We're always going to need this speaker to show us the sound. If we're talking about a sound analogy, that the source might change. We went from records to 8-tracks to cassette tapes to CDs to MP3s, but what stayed the same in all of that? Well, we needed a speaker to make that sound. So the source will change, but we always need the speaker in the end. So what happens in our body may change of our camera, but we need a high quality lens to be able to get that information into the camera body. The last thing is really where the third part of the magic happens, and that's our light source. Everyone has probably, excuse me, seen this on the left, which is our ring flash. You may not have seen these other two things on the middle and to the right of your screen, which is the twin flash and then the softbox. And I'm pretty certain no one has seen the softbox. The image on the right of the softbox is going to be for our portrait photography, and that's going to be 100% important to achieve these kind of results. I think we'll start off with everybody at least considering getting this ring flash for your macro Canon lens or your Nikon lens to begin with. So the take-home message is that we need flash. We cannot rely on this little Cobra flash or the flash that pops up on our camera body. Simply not powerful enough to get us the image that we want. So if we want stunning images, we have to understand that we have to put more light onto our subject, whether it's portrait or whether it's intraoral photography. So these are the 4 things that we're going to need to invest our money into: a camera body, which is not the main source of our investment, a lens, which will probably be the main source of our investment, and then our flash and our softbox, which you see on the right-hand side. So let's take a look. How do we get started? How do we become a high-quality dental photographer? And once again, all of these skills can then get turned into, I'm just a skilled photographer for whatever it is that you want to do, for your family life, your pet life, your hobby life, whatever it is. But I really want you to get away from this little green thing that made us so easy and it's actually depended on, was that little green square or the green auto button. That's the first thing I want you to sort of understand. I want you to roll that wheel over to where it says M, because we're going to shoot in manual mode. And I'm going to talk about the things that I really want you to focus on this webinar. And we will dig really deep into these things in the full one-day workshop. And I'm going to talk about the big 3. The big 3 are on your left-hand side. So it's almost like a little Venn diagram that each one is important, but we need to pick something that's going to give us the best of the 3. And those three are the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. And if you've never heard these terms before, don't get confused. I know it's a lot to take in, but this webinar will be online, and then you can go back and see the parts of the webinar that really are important right there. The three on the right-hand side, certainly important, but outside the scope of what I think I can do justice to cover in about 45 minutes. So let's talk about ISO to begin with. And everyone always thinks it stands for, International Standards Organization, but really ISO is coming from the Greek root word of equal. Back in the days, and I'll age myself here, when we had film cameras, they always had this film speed and it had this ISO number on there. And when we actually dealt with film, it had, this silver halide sort of on top of the film, and that's what made our image. So the finer the grain of the silver halide on our film, the more crisp or clear our image would be. The bigger the grain size on our ISO film of the silver halide crystal, the grainier the image would be. But the advantage of those grains getting larger on the film would be that it'd be more sensitive to light. Now that we have digital cameras and we don't have to run down to the local photo shack and get our film developed, so we can see the image immediately. But this sensor obviously is not a piece of film, so we can't make a sensor more or less sensitive to light, because as soon as the sensor is absorbing the light, it has absorbed whatever light it can. But the internal software of that camera now applies gain. And the more gain we apply, the more noise we get in our image, or graininess we get in our image. The cameras themselves now have gotten so good that, before, when we shot an ISO film, if we went much past 400, we'd start to see this grain or this noise. Now, in most of the camera bodies, you can get up to maybe 1200, 1600 on the ISO, and you'll barely see some grain. So for us, we want clean, crisp images. So we're going to focus on staying with a low ISO number, which means that our sensitivity to light is not that high, because we want images that are clean and not noisy like you see on the right-hand side. So one of the three circles, the big three that we're focused on, is going to be this ISO number. So these cameras go from 100 to well past 1600. So my suggestion to you guys is we're going to follow the rules of 2, and we're going to start with an ISO setting of 200. So then we can consistently go up if we need to, or we could even step down if we want to. So the take-home message here is going to be that we're going to stay somewhere where our image is clean, in that ISO 200, ISO 400. And then when we start jumping up, even though the camera sensors are really, really good, we're going to see a little bit of this graininess or noise really starting at around ISO 1800, ISO 800 to 1600 right there. The number 2 of the big three is going to be shutter speed. And we have 2 examples here of what shutter speed does for you. And one, we have this composite that I'm dropping from the same height and taking a photo. If I set my manual mode and say I want my shutter speed to open and close for 1/100th of a second, that's what that 1/100 means. That means that the shutter is open long enough for me not to get a very crisp image, because it's opening enough and then closing, but we've gotten that image movement. So if we're looking for movement, then that shutter speed would be good. But for us in dental photography, we want a nice, crisp image. So we're going to have to increase that shutter speed to 1/200th of a 50th of a second. So much shorter amount of time, the crisper the image is going to be. What I want you to think in the back of your head is that every time I make an adjustment, there is a plus and a minus, a pro and a con. So the plus or the pro in this thing is that we're going to get a nice crisp image at 1/250th of a second. The con of this is going to be that we may not have enough light come in, so our image might look darker. Then we're going to talk about how to make these adjustments to make sure that we get all 3 of those living in the same space together. So another way to look at it is of this pinwheel. If I started spinning a pinwheel and I had a very slow shutter speed, let's just say it was 1 second, we would see this pinwheel looking blurry like we have on the left-hand side. If we change that to a 1/2 second, we might show that we can see the 6 different colors of the pinwheel right here. And then if we made it really fast, maybe 1/250th of a second, it would look like that pinwheel is not even spinning, because we were able to freeze time by making that shutter speed open and close very, very quickly. So in our Venn diagram, we talked about the ISO being at around 200. And then we're going to follow the rules of 2 here for our shutter speed, that we can have a very fast or very slow shutter speed. But I'm going to say, let's start off with our shutter being open and closed in 1/250th of a second. The reason this becomes important is that when you are taking a photo with your camera, trying to take an integral image, you're going to be moving a little bit. Your patient's going to be moving a little bit. Your assistant may be moving a little bit, holding the cheek retractors in place. So we want to pick a relatively quick opening of our shutter so we don't get any patient movement into our photograph. The last of the big three is what really confuses a lot of people. So I put this at the end here so we can spend just a minute or two more on that, which is called f-stop. And f-stop is how big the opening is that's coming from the lens into our sensor or the body of our camera. As backwards as it may seem, a high f-stop of 32 means that the opening, the diaphragm, is very, very small. And if we have a low f-stop, and most lenses that are in the macro family will go down to 2.8, means that the opening is very, very large. Now, if we said that, why is that important to us on this f-stop number? Because how big or how closed that diaphragm is directly related to our depth of field. And for us as dental photographers, now intraoral photographers, we want to have the whole mouth in focus from the central incisor all the way back to the molar. So if we use an f-stop of 2.8, that means that the aperture is open really, really wide. Lots of light is coming in, but our depth of field is going to be very shallow, that maybe only the two centrals will be in focus. Everything else will be blurry. You'll look at your photograph and say, gosh, I don't know why I'm not getting these crisp images. Was I moving? Has nothing to do with movement, has everything to do with your aperture. If you go to f11, which is a setting that you probably take a portrait photo on, you would see that now maybe the front 6 teeth are in focus, but then everything falls off into being blurry in the background. And then if you put it up to f32, then you'll say, wow, I can see from front to back, everything is crisp, everything is in focus. But now remember what I just said, that as this aperture gets smaller, the f-stop got really big, depth of field increased, that aperture getting smaller has a negative to it as well. And that negative is the amount of light that comes into our sensor is drastically reduced. So we always have to remember that if we dial our f-stop up, we need to think in our minds, what do we need to do to increase light? Well, one is if we have an external source of light, we could bring that closer to the patient. Or the other thing that we could do is we could increase our sensitivity of our sensor, and that's really not the right word, but the gain that our sensor applies to our light coming in by turning up the ISO number from 200 to something larger. So if we look at an example here, at the top and the bottom, you can see the top image, the front teeth are in focus. And then as we look at premolar back, it's very blurry. On the bottom image, we can start to see that from front to back, central to posterior molar are all in focus. So if I were to ask you the question, the top image, where is that f-stop? And if we said that f-stop is large or small, the number is on the top photo where only the centrals are in focus, our f-stop is very, very small. On the bottom, our f-stop is large because now we have everything in focus. This same principle applies to taking photographs outside of the mouth. Let's say you wanted to take a photograph of this Bruxer Bridge. If we had a low f-stop, we'd only have the front centrals in focus. If we dial that f-stop up, we're saying, oh, wow, now we're starting to see that this bridge is coming into focus a little bit more from front to back. May not be perfectly in focus, but now if we dial our f-stop all the way up, now we're starting to see that from central to molar, everything is in focus. This is a beautiful image. Now, the one thing that I can't show you on this slide is what did I have to do to increase the amount of light? Because if I change that f-stop from all the way from f2.8 up to f22, I had to bring in a lot more light because that diaphragm got very, very small. So I have to put more light onto this external image, or if it was an intraoral image, I would have to put more light into my patient's mouth by bringing the light sources closer and or increase my ISO number. So the same thing here. These happen to be some Han implant carriers. With a low f-stop of 2.8, only the magenta one is in focus. And then as we look further into it, they start to become fuzzier and fuzzier. Same exact camera, same exact distance. All we did was roll the f-stop up to a bigger depth of field, which means a smaller opening, increase the sensitivity of our sensor to light, and increase the amount of light by bringing the light sources closer to our subject. And now we have the magenta all the way to the green carrier in focus. And that's simply by understanding the f-stop number. This one might be a decent one for you guys to sort of take a photograph of showing that at an f2.8, only the person in the middle is in focus. And if we look at the bottom of the screen at f22, the person with the umbrella all the way back to the tree are going to be in focus. The little three, which we don't have time to get into today, but we will dig into deeper, are white balance, exposure, and editing. And white balance is going to talk about the color temperature. The editing is going to be how to fix certain things into Photoshop. And exposure is going to be how your image looks, whether it's overexposed or underexposed. Those are not really things that we have time to dig into today, but we will certainly cover those in the full day workshop. So let's get to some of the magic on how to share this passion and how to share what you like with your potential patients or the patients that you have. And that's really, to me, portrait photography. So we're going to grab our camera, and this is the camera setup that I purchased when I first started in the dental photography about 8 or 9 years ago. I got a body, I got a Canon lens, and I got a ring flash, and I had no idea what the settings were. And I would try to get pictures of my patients to show what I was able to do, but every time I backed up far enough away to get the patient's entire head in focus, or onto the sensor, my image would look really dark. So I had to get closer to the patient, but then it looked kind of goofy because I've got the patient's head cut off, the ears are cut off. But I didn't understand some basic settings. I'm hoping that you guys don't repeat those kind of mistakes. Once we finally figured that out, we got some training. Look at the massive difference between just taking with a camera with a ring flash versus understanding portrait photography, which you see is after. It is the portrait photo that I'm really wanting you guys to get. And this repeats itself with all the patients that we saw, that if once we understood how to do this, we can achieve this beautiful black background and a more natural look to our patients. So this is what I want you guys to start with, as opposed to having to go through trial and error like I did, of a beautiful before and a beautiful after, so you can show your patients what you're able to contribute to their well-being and what you can do for their cosmetics and function. So every single patient now gets a portrait, and every single patient gets a after portrait. You will be amazed at the times that patient says, "Can you email me that picture right there? I've never had a beautiful picture taken like that for me." And that continues with all of the patients that we are able to do. Now, these just happen to be examples of patients that we've treated with full arch Bruxer implant bridges. Can portrait photography be applied to something else? Well, absolutely. It can be applied to group photography. And your group is your family, or whatever it is that you want to do. Create stunning photographs like this. You have the equipment. Why don't you do it? If we look at this photograph down here on the front column to the right or to the left of me, you'll see this young man who was in the maxi course wearing a Carolina sweatshirt. And that's where I went to dental school. So we used him as an example of how to take a stunning portrait, understanding the three things I told you, the big three right there. So we took his actual camera, his Canon camera, his Canon lens, his ring flash, and we took a portrait photo of him, and it's clearly not a stunning result, because this is what I was doing. I was leaving it on a high f-stop with an ISO of 200 and taking my ring flash and saying, boy, this is terrible. Everything is turning out too dark. I can barely see him. The only way that I knew how to get more light onto my subject was to physically take my camera and get closer to him, but then I'd start to cut off his ears and his head and things like that. So since you guys are smarter than me and understand a few things, you understand that, oh, if I dial down the f-stop and take it to where the diaphragm is bigger by changing that f-stop of 22 and dialing it down to f11, that means more light is going to get into my camera's sensor. And now all of a sudden we've taken and done nothing, same person, same camera, same lens, same ring flash, and we now have a relatively decent portrait photo of him right there. But what if we went one step further? What if we replaced our light source with something called a softbox? And you're going to see exactly what a softbox here is in a little bit. And now we have what I think is even a more stunning portrait photo with a completely black background. If you look at this one with the ring flash, if you look real closely, you can see it's relatively black, but not completely. Now, we do not have a piece of black behind him. We are forcing the background to get black by understanding that if we increase our f-stop and bring our lights closer, only thing that's going to be in focus and show up is him. Everything else is going to turn black in the background. So this is the same camera setup. The only thing that we did was we changed the light that's hitting our subject right there by adding something called a softbox. And this is what a softbox is. It's an external source of light. So you have all seen these things right here in the middle, an external flash. Usually it goes right on top of the camera. What we're going to do is we're going to buy a very inexpensive box. It's called a softbox. And we're going to place our flash inside of that softbox right there. We're going to put two of them at 45-degree angles to our subject. And now we're going to be able to create that stunning portrait that we're talking about creating. We don't have to have this little reflector that you're showing in the, or I'm showing in the setup right here. But essentially, we put those boxes at 45, and now we're able to get light onto our subject in a more pleasant format. And then this is the setup that I have to take all of my before pictures right here. So this happened to be the exact setting that I probably would teach you guys to do, that ISO of 200, f11 on our f-stop, and my flashes happen to be at half power at 45 degrees from my subject right there. So we were able to create what I think is a relatively stunning portrait to begin with a black background. A lot of times, you know, we see these white backgrounds and doctors ask me, how do you get that white background? Now, if you want a beautiful, stunning white background, you would incorporate a third light, and really you would put a piece of white behind it, because then we could create that sort of soft halo of white behind our patient. I don't happen to have the room or 3 lights. So here I created this white background simply by moving one of my soft boxes behind the patient or subject and changing the power of the rear flash to 1/8 power, and left the one flash in the front at half power, and left the rest of the settings the same. And really, I think you can see, and the magic here is you can always tell what kind of lighting was on the subject by looking at the subject's eyes. And if you see right here in this one, that we see one reflection point in her eye right there, because I don't have 2 flashes anymore. If we look at the reflection in this one right here, we have the black background. It's relatively easy to see in her eyes that we have 2 reflection points right there. And if we look really closely, we can see that they're the shape of the softbox that I have. So mine happened to be sort of that octagon or round shape right there. So there's always ways to force our camera to do the things that we want it to do. And I hope that you'll take some of this information and realize it's not film anymore. So we can play as much as we want to with this camera in manual mode and take what we like and understand the principles that I'm trying to teach you. Could you take it with your iPhone? Absolutely, you could do this. Just put your iPhone in portrait mode and you can take these same photographs that you're wanting to. Are they going to be 100% the same and correct? No, but they're going to be pretty darn good. If we look at them side by side, you know, to me, the lower one is a more stunning portrait. But certainly, if I was starting my journey and said I need to at least start somewhere, I would start taking pictures of my patients in portrait mode with my iPhone. What about intraoral photography? Well, there's a few things you're going to need for intraoral photography, and one is some cheek retractors right there. I actually went on eBay this morning, so I needed to buy some more, and I found the retractors you see on the left. There was a set of 20 of those, and I just throw them away. Don't even autoclave them for $9.95. So none of this stuff is expensive to get. But the thing about intraoral photography is some of that we don't understand is that we want to get these retractors in our patient's mouth and just pull, pull, pull. So it's really pull to the side and pull forward or away from the patient. We're trying to create this tunnel so our lights can get into the patient's mouth to light it up. We are definitely going to need mirrors when we start talking about occlusal photography. Mirrors, once again, could be expensive, maybe not quite as expensive. So wherever you need to be in this, whether titanium or whether you go all the way down to stainless steel, certainly, you know, titanium is going to be the most reflective of our mirrors and certainly can break if you drop it on the ground. Ask me how I know. You'll cry when $68 hits the floor. Stainless steel certainly is not going to break when it hits the floor, but will be not as reflective as titanium will. But I'm going to teach you a really cheap or inexpensive trick. If you have one of these stainless steel mirrors and you want it to not fog up when it goes into the patient's mouth, just get your little endo torch and just pass it over the mirror about 3 times, as in 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And now the mirror is going to be heated up to enough about body temperature that it will not fog up when you place it in your patient's mouth. And you'll be able to get this kind of photograph. Now, remember what I told you, stainless steel is not going to be as reflective as titanium. So if you're going to use a stainless steel occlusal mirror, dial your ISO up twice. So whatever you needed to get a good photograph in titanium, you're going to dial that up 2x. So in this example, we dialed the ISO up to 400, made that sensor apply a little bit more gain to the light that came in right there. The other thing that's inexpensive to get to make your portraits even more stunning is something called a contraster. And a contraster is exactly what you see here. How do you get that black background? If the focus of our treatment plan is going to be these upper teeth, then if we just take and get rid of the lower teeth by putting a contraster behind it, we can get that kind of image that really brings those upper teeth into focus. And we could do that same thing with the lower teeth right there. Now, this is an unedited image, so we've not taken this and done anything in Photoshop. If you look real carefully, you can see the little white speckles that are probably the tissue paper that was on that contraster right there. And then we can talk about in the full workshop how to get rid of that and make it completely black. But this is the money shot right here. Here is a cheat sheet of where you need to be for your settings to start with. Are these the perfect settings? Absolutely not, but it's a great place to start if you don't know where to go. And then you're going to focus on the left-hand side, the aperture, the ISO, and the shutter speed of where you need to go. So for intraoral, a high f-stop, big depth of field, f22, ISO of 200, shutter speed of 1/200 or 1/250, whatever your camera will let you do. And in portrait mode, we're going to dial that f-stop down, make it the f11, and leave the other two alone. So then you can look at your image and see if you're getting what you want to. Now that we've covered the parts and pieces you need and the camera and the lens and how to do extraoral, intraoral photography, let's look at what it's going to take a portrait photo. Now, I alluded to these little flashes, that softbox right there. The reason why we never really had too much of this in dentistry was back when these flashes first came out, you had to buy a Canon flash, and that was about $600 a pop. So it really became hard for us as dentists to justify this if we're not a professional photographer. Now we can buy lots of flashes that are not made by Canon, but third parties that are much, much less expensive. I'm talking like $60 a flash. So we can now have access to making some stunning portrait photos. And then for our intraoral photos, we're going to stick with our ring flash or our twin flash. So a ring flash is a great way to start to get as much light as we need into our patient's mouth to light up front to back with the high f-stops or the centrals to the molars are in focus. But what if we use something that makes a softer light? And now you can see this is the same exact person, but instead of using a light that just goes straight in and comes right out to our camera, what if we moved those to more of a 45 and made it a little softer? When I say softer, it stretches the light out. Now look at the difference. We can see the stippling of the gum. We can see the texture. We can see the little craze lines. This is going to communicate so much more information to you, to your patient, to your laboratory technician. You can even see sort of like now that outline of that composite that's on the incisal edge of number 8. When we look at it in this sort of harsh light, it's barely visible, but boy, wouldn't it be nice to be able to show Miss Smith, do you see this now? And I think she'd go, wow, I can see that. I can see this craze line that's in that other front tooth. When did that happen? What's going on? So it's a great conversation starter. Certainly something that you're going to need to invest a few dollars into if you're wanting to get to this. But that's the difference of the example on the top with a ring flash versus the example on the bottom with removing the light sources from the camera, moving them off of the camera and making them into a softer light. Another example that I'm going to show you, this is with the ring flash, same camera, same lens. All we did was change the light to a softer light. It almost looks like a completely different bridge because now the light is coming in from 45-degree angles, hitting our subject, which happens to be this bridge in this example, and then coming back to our camera. In our workshop, I actually had a student bring me his camera. And I said, I want you to take a picture of this bridge on the tabletop. He took it with his ring flash. We left the settings 100% the same. And all we did was deactivate his ring flash and put a couple of soft boxes on there. And it almost looks like a different bridge. Just a beautiful soft lighting that we get for this photography right there. So these are when I talk about soft lighting, the soft box that you see on the left for portrait. If you want to apply some more smaller soft boxes to your flashes on your setup or buy this bracket has to be by PhotoMed. But when you get to this kind of dedication, this is pretty bulky and it's pretty large and it's going to come across your patient like a eagle's wings. So You have to decide where you need to be or want to be in this this arena right there. The ring flash, certainly acceptable. Twin flash, certainly acceptable, and maybe a little bit nicer because we can tilt them at 45 and capture a little bit more around our patient or our subject. And then the last one, which is the bouncers on the bracket, really wrap around the whole thing. So once again, same thing, ring, twin, and diffuse light right there really shows you what you're able to achieve by taking that next step right there. So what is all this going to cost you? How much are you going to have to spend? Well, like I said, I don't want you to spend all your money on the camera body. If you happen to want to get a relatively decent camera body, if you got a Canon 80D, 80D, it'll set you back around $900 just for the camera body. However, this is my camera. This is from 2005. It's a camera D60, not a 60D. It actually uses a compact flash for the memory card. It's only 6 megapixels, so certainly way less than the 20 megapixels. Every example that I showed you of the work that I took is taken with this camera right here. It's $89. Am I suggesting that you go out and run out and get this camera? Absolutely not. I mean, it's so old that I don't think that's the right answer. But I think if you had a budget of $300, $400, $500, you could buy a very acceptable camera body. What's an SD card going to cost you? I looked it up today. A 16 gigabyte was actually more expensive than a 32 gigabyte SD card. So around $6 for one of those. But this is where I want you to spend your money. If you have a limited budget, then you can buy a Tachyna Macro 100 for the Canon or Tachyna Macro 105 for the Nikon, and that will set you back around $400. If you want to buy the true Canon Red Stripe macro lens, be prepared to pay $1,000 or more for that. But once again, every example that I've shown you has this Tachyna macro lens on it right there. You're going to need this thing that sits on top of your camera called a communicator or a controller. My recommendation is this Yongnuo. It's around $40 at Amazon or wherever you decide to go. And that's what's going to talk to your flashes. And when I say flashes, speed lights, flashes, they're both saying the same thing, but you're going to need 2 of those. And a Yongnuo flash is going to cost you around $80. So, you know, you can buy that at anywhere that you want to go. And then a ring light, around $200. A softbox, you're going to need 2 of those. Those are around $60 each. You will need a tripod to set it on, which is around $30, and you'll need some rechargeable batteries right there. So that kind of wraps up, you know, what you're going to need to take these kind of photos right there. But let's wrap up today's webinar with just looking at what's going to help patients move forward. So high quality portrait photos of what they started with, and then high quality portrait photos of where they ended up. Anything that you can do to demonstrate to your patients, this is what I do, this is what I'm passionate about, these are the patients that I've helped, this is the kind of work that I stand for, these are the different things that really make me want to become the dentist that wants to help you move forward. And then don't forget that we'll wrap up with stylistic shots. And I will show you guys how to take these right here. But this really just communicates to the Instagram world or the Facebook world or the social media marketing what you're passionate about. Cinco de Mayo is coming up. So last year we took a lemon or lime slice and we just put some of our work on top of that right there. When I was in New York, I took this of the Big Apple. This is what Dr. Cheese cases right here, and I just love this. Obviously, he's heard me say it over and over again. Bruxer aesthetic veneer case, beautiful, beautiful work. I think just complemented by this photo right there. So whatever it is that you're passionate about, I think you're going to be able to do. I will end up with just showing you, your passion can go into anything, whether it's your pets or whether it's your personal life. And then I really do want to show you guys at some point when we get into the workshops how we can do the blending. And by blending, I mean, obviously this is a picture of my son. I have removed him for the photograph, so it looks like we just have a shadow of him standing there in his shoes. We can show you all kinds of really, really cool things. Your creativity certainly is greater than mine. But when you have this kind of ability, I think you're going to walk away with something really good. I'm sorry I ran over. I apologize for the technical difficulty, but thank you very much for your attention. And I look forward to seeing you at one of my workshops so we can really dig into this. And please bring your cameras. I'm happy to show you how to make this kind of photography a part of your everyday workflow. Thank you, Susmitha.